This is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jim McDonald. Unfortunately, Jeff Stedman couldn't make it to this episode, but we're going to have a fantastic conversation about death in the digital estate. It's been something that you've probably been reading about on your LinkedIn feed, but today we're going to jump into it with the people who are advancing the ball with this. I'm going to start out by introducing Dean Saxe. He's the Principal Security Engineer for Identity and Access Management at Remitly. He's also the co-chair of the OpenID Foundation Death in the Digital Estate Community Group that we're going to talk about today. And he's the co-chair of the IPSI Working Group. Both of those are at the OpenID Foundation. Dean was last with us on episode 316 all the way back in November. And Dean, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jim. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. And last time we recorded together was at Authenticate last year. I look forward to seeing you there in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, can't wait. That's always a great location to be for a conference, that's for sure. What have you been up to since then?
After I last saw you there, I spent a few more months at the startup I was at. I left the startup back in early June, about a week or so after Identiverse. Spent the summer kind of doing other non-IT, non-identity oriented things, and spent a lot of time with these two lovely people here, Mike and Heather, working on the Death in the Digital Estate white paper that we're going to talk about in a little bit, as well as the planning guide that we'll also talk about. And spent some time doing some interviews and joined Remitly as the Principal Security Engineer for Identity and Access Management just about 9 days ago. So I am actively drinking from all of the fire hoses right now and trying to learn about the business, our identity systems, and trying to figure out right now which end is up.
Yeah, I know. When you join a new organization, you're just trying to figure that out. So have you gotten down the elevator pitch on what Remitly does?
I've gotten some of the elevator pitch down, but Remitly is a money transfer service. So we transfer funds, predominantly serving like immigrant communities who want to transfer funds back home, and operate in I think it was 160 countries worldwide, but please don't quote me on that. And I should note that the work I'm doing with OpenID Foundation Death and Digital Estate Community Group is on my own time. It's not related to my work here at Remitly, but they certainly support me doing that, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it sounds like it's kind of a good cause, which I'm sure kind of played into your decision to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. Working at a place that really puts people first, it was really important to me. Many years ago, I worked at the Gates Foundation, kind of had very similar mission, obviously nonprofit versus a for-profit company, so a little different. But it really aligns with my own personal values, and so I'm super happy to be here.
That sounds awesome. So, Dean, we're also joined by two other lovely people, as you said. So this is going to be an exciting episode. We also have Heather Flanagan. She's the founder of Spherical Cal Consulting. Gosh, that's a mouthful for me for some reason. Heather's a regular on the podcast, I would say. So she was here back in episode 228, all the way back in August 23. And it's important to kind of like go back to that landmark, because if you want to hear how she got into identity, that's where you go. But she was also here in episode 344, giving us the ID Pro quarterly update. As you know, the podcast is the official podcast of the ID Pro. Heather, what have you been up to since the last time you were here?
Well, I've been on a lot of airplanes. I have been collecting a whole set of Delta trading cards, because Delta Airlines has trading cards for their airplanes. It's very exciting. And I've been doing quite a bit of research for a blog series, because I'm an avid blogger. No one pays me for that. This is just stuff I do because it's how I learn. I learn by writing. And what's coming out next week is about internet fragmentation, specifically fragmentation at the technical level, the regulatory level, and the commercial level, which is interesting to see how that's changing the internet as we know it. But then the next one is about what's going to mitigate that fragmentation, which is supply chain realities. You can't build your computers. You can't advance your AI. You can't grow your cloud without computer chips. And you can't build computer chips locally. That's a global effort. And then the next one is about demographics. And then the last one is about what does all this look like in standards development. So it was like a whole lot of research that went into this, a lot of writing, a lot of fun.
Heather, I love how you're like really expanding your world. I mean, identity's always been kind of at the core of what you do, but now it's growing beyond that. And what has driven you to want to do that?
It's more, in a way, it's the other way around, right? The world is starting to recognize that identity is at the core of your digital experience. All the way through.
You could say identity's at the center if you want.
You could say that, in fact, and you would not necessarily be wrong. So for me, looking at all of this, it's still all related. It's still, okay, well, if identity drives your online experience, what else drives your online experience? What else is the internet about and the web about, and how does it all come together? So these kinds of questions are very useful. And honestly, there was a bit of a selfish question into it because I can see the fragmentation happening. I'm a globalist at the end of the day. I want to know what's happening in the world because I am constantly going around the world to meet with different people to talk about internet standards and digital identity and everything. Well, what does that look like in a world where things are becoming more fragmented and more isolationist? What does a globalist like me do for a living in a world like that? That's what really got me thinking about this, and that's where those blog posts came from.
Heather, how long have you been traveling all over the world?
15 years.
Okay, 15 years. I traveled to Europe a lot, kind of, it was around like 05, 06, so like 20 years ago. And what I realized was, having never left the U.S., you get a very U.S.-centered view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's healthy for everybody to travel internationally and just get the different perspectives that, there's not an us and them, it's just an us, right?
Pretty much.
That's kind of the way I look at it.
My first international trip for business, which was really my first international trip for anything that exposed me to different cultures, was the day I turned 40. So, it's never too late to actually start on learning that and experiencing that. So, highly recommend.
And I just realized they said there's never an us and a them. And here I am wearing my New York Yankees hat.
I wasn't going to say it, but.
And I was at a big playoff game last night, and I'm going to introduce our next guest, and I know he's going to be giving me a hard time, so I'm just going to get it out there. I am a Yankees fan, and I've had people say, "Oh, and I guess you also like the Dallas Cowboys and all the teams that win all the time." And that's not true. I don't like the Cowboys, but I hope we don't get anybody unsubscribing from the show just because I'm wearing a New York Yankees hat. I feel like I'm taking a chance a little bit. What do you think, Mike?
I think it's a choice. I mean, it's not, you got to be true to who you are though, Jim, right? You can't hide your affections and your passions to your audience. I think they can live with that. They can learn to adapt. Even, we all make mistakes, and this can just be one of yours, No, I have a friend who follows the Cleveland Guardians, the Cleveland teams in general, religiously. And the only reason I know as much as I do about Cleveland sports is because of him. He's always sending me a message saying, "Hey, can you believe what happened?" And I'm like, I'm going to have to go look up because I know it's Cleveland sports related somehow. So I can't help but know what's going on with the Browns and the Guardians. And that's kind of what friendships are made off of, right? Affections and how we define our identity. Haha. And just being in relation there. So yeah, no shame in that. And you'll make up the subscriber base from New Yorkers, right? You lose a few Boston folks, that's all right.
You never know. We want everyone to listen. So regardless of what your team affiliation, I remember there were different times where I was not as into sports. I mean, it kind of comes and goes. I remember people saying, "Oh yeah, did you see that game this weekend?" Oh yeah. Yeah, well,
sure.
Could you believe that call? No, couldn't believe that call. That's terrible. Terrible call.
You just got to be general, journalist. Yeah.
You are Mike Kiser, Director of Strategy and Standards at SailPoint and co-chair of the Shared Signals Working Group at OIDF. that's a lot. And you are also a friend of the show. You're here back on episode 318 back in November of 24. What have you been up to since then?
Well, since that glorious episode 318, which was a lot of fun, normal life, which means a couple different things, right? It means trying to advance the shared signals standard, obviously, working on some event-based SCEM approaches in the IETF that's nearing last call, doing a day job, obviously, on behalf of SailPoint, but then also the stuff that we worked on here with Death in the Digital Estate is kind of my wheelhouse. I have a degree in theology, and I'm also in technology and innovation and all that. And so it all kind of wraps up together, right? And so I've actually been reading a fascinating book that's going to take me forever, but that's okay. It's called Sources of the Self by an Oxford professor named Charles Taylor. And it's really fascinating because he's trying to define how we form our identities and how that evolves into basically how we make moral choices and decide what's important and what's valuable and all that. And that really plays in my opinion, into what we're doing, because it's kind of the core of our humanity. And so that it's really fascinating and rare to be at a place where different streams of passion and thought, and whether it's, globalism or whatever else it is, like this is such a nexus of different avenues that meet together. And so it's just really exciting to hang out with cool people like Dean and Heather and Eve, our co-chair, and they're working in the community group, to just all kind of hang out, and a cast of many, 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 many people, all coming from different geos and walks of life, and saying, "Oh, I saw this. This is my experience." You get that with this kind of a discussion. People just light up because there's always some avenue for them to share their experience.
Yeah, I'm going to record with Eve next week. And I know she's always been like a huge fan of what you guys are working on with DADE. So what is Eve's role in all of this?
So Eve is one of our co-chairs. Last year, around the summer of last year, so after Identiverse of 2024, we did a presentation at Identiverse on the main stage, and it was Eve and Mike and Kalia Young and myself. After that presentation, I kind of left with the task of writing a charter to charter the community group, and kind of dawdled on it for a while, didn't really get much done. And then Eve was like, "Hey, where is this anyway?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I gotta finish that." And sort of prompted me to get it done, get it up in front of the OIDF board and get the community group chartered. And once that happened, of course, there were two natural people that I wanted to ask to join me on the journey as co-chairs, and that's Mike and Eve. And I couldn't ask for better co-chairs because we all come from slightly different places, slightly different traditions, certainly different backgrounds. I don't have the background in theology that Mike does, but it's been really helpful to have those different perspectives as we start having these conversations that are not always easy, because believe it or not, people don't like speaking about death. In fact, it is something I am fundamentally and horribly uncomfortable with, and I have had to find a way to build my comfort level with being able to talk about it, so that we can move this work forward. Because one of my values is protecting myself and others, and I live by that value every day. And in order to do that, it means that we have to move this work forward, because it is about protecting not only people that I care about, but about providing those mechanisms to protect anyone who wants to avail themselves of them when they are interacting online. And all of us are eventually going to die, whether we like it or not. And so we all need that set of tools that doesn't exist today and hopefully will in the future, in order to be able to protect our identities posthumously.
That's very well put. And so the Death in Digital Estate Community Group is about putting out guidance for all the things that you just talked about? The guidance, or is it what is the perspective of the community group in terms of everything you just said? How do you advise people?
Yeah. So when we founded the community group, it was founded as a community group, which does not have the authority within the OpenID Foundation to write specifications, because we didn't even know at the time of founding and writing the charter what kind of specifications would we even write. We didn't know the extent of the problems. We didn't know the extent of the legal challenges, the technical challenges, the social and cultural challenges that we were going to face. And so the community group was really founded to try and draw some of that out and draw out an understanding of what is the current state of play with managing one's digital estate and trying to understand all of the interactions with law and policy and culture and religion, et cetera. And I have to say, I have learned so much about other people and cultures through this work and the way that they think about things. And so in collecting that data and collecting kind of some use cases for why we need to manage our digital estates, instances like there was a gentleman in Arizona, I believe it was Arizona, Mike, please correct me if I'm wrong, and he was murdered after a road rage incident. And a few years went by, and it went to trial, and the person who murdered this gentleman was found guilty. And during the sentencing phase of the trial, the family of the deceased man used AI to create an AI deepfake of this person who's now deceased, using his images and voice to be played for the judge and the assembled audience in the courtroom during the sentencing phase of this trial, which of course influences how that plays out. But the reality is that it wasn't his words. It wasn't the deceased's words. It wasn't his thoughts. It was the thoughts and the words of his sister who put this avatar together, or this deepfake together, that got played in the court. And for me, I feel horribly uncomfortable with these kinds of things. And as technology continues to progress, we're seeing more and more of these sorts of things pop up in the world. And I don't think we as a society yet know how to handle it. And, I certainly don't. And I think both Heather and Mike would agree that these are challenges that we need to describe and document so that we can then begin to work to find solutions.
Hopefully this isn't taking us too far off from where you were going, but we talked about, use the term community group here, use the term working group when we talked about some of the other things that are going on. I'm wondering, what is a community group? Like, what are the differences there? Why do you call one a community group? Why do you call another a working group? I'm not sure if Mike or Heather have an answer for that.
I got this one. So if we were writing this down, I would now put a little sidebar around this part of the conversation. Nice little box, make it even. A community group is literally a community that can come together and less formally share information. And that's pretty much the same across several different standards organizations, the OpenID Foundation, the W3C. There's still the level of formality exists to say you do have to actually generally agree to certain codes of conduct, how you're going to behave in the group. You're going to have to accept certain levels of intellectual property rules, things like that. But it is a place to come and chat and share ideas and whatnot. However, fairly consistently across all of the standards organizations I've ever worked with, a community group, while they can get together, they can chat, they can write papers, they can have meetings, they can have notes. What they cannot do is actually develop a technical standard or a best practice document, right? They cannot do what the W3C would call a recommendation. They cannot do what the OpenID Foundation would call a standard. That is reserved for working groups. Working groups generally have stricter participation requirements in terms of you generally have to be a member of whatever organization it is. What that membership looks like will depend from one organization to the next. And there's usually stricter intellectual property rules going with it. You still have to abide by the same codes of conduct in terms of everyone's trying to make the internet better, so don't be mean about it kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Heather. So I'm going to ask another open-ended question that is going to get to the scope of this whole thing. We all know what death is, I think. we don't have to have an episode describing what death is, but what is the digital estate?
That's a great question. Mike, why don't you take that one? I think you've got some interesting perspectives on this.
Digital estate is, I would say, bigger than whatever you previously thought it was, because it's continually growing, which is kind of a cop-out, obviously, right? But
Not very helpful, Mike. More detail.
I'm going into more
See, this
detail.
is why I was the editor for the paper.
Yeah. I was about to say, this is why whenever I have questions about process or definitions, I ask Heather, like community group versus working group. Heather will give you a concise one-sentence answer. I'm just going to ramble for a while. No, I would say it's a combination of things. It is things you've produced, things you've created, your audio, video, biological reproductions, all of your accounts, your posts, your comments, anything online, videos that are recorded, your documents, your papers, your emails, your texts. So basically, every time I try and wrap my arms around it and say, here it is, a headline hits or technology advances. Dean's example is great, right? I would never have thought of me dying, heaven forbid, in some kind of accident and then my loved ones recreating me to comment on my own demise. That just feels like a dystopian novel on some level. Obviously, I'm revealing my bias about what I think about that, but at the same time, it's all of that, and it's increasing day by day. Denmark in June, for instance, was working towards giving its citizens the right to have their likenesses copyrighted, for instance. But now we live in a world where you kind of have to do that because there are AI recreations and other things that can just pop up and recreate you. And part of it is that technology advancement. So I would say the reason I'm reading that book about how identity is defined is because I'm trying to get a handle on what that actually is. If my identity and my life in the physical world means one thing, how does that translate or not translate to a digital environment?
I think that's incredibly well said, Mike. And one of the things I think we forget about when we talk about digital estates, and Eve is really good at thinking about this and talking about this, is all of the sort of digital exhaust that follows us around the web. So, the various ways that we're tracked and our metadata is collected and used to target advertising and other things toward us. All of that is part of our digital estate too. It's probably the hardest part of it to think about, but that I think we have to consider as part and parcel of what that estate entails.
It's kind of exhausting to think about, I would say.
But I need a card beam right about now.
One of the things I would want to emphasize, just to like really bring it to something, questions that people have asked me about this whole topic. It's not just your passwords. Right? It's not just if you have to have a password for it, that's your digital estate. Well, it's bigger than that. And making sure that the passwords are safely recorded in a password manager is always good practice. Yay. But even setting up the opportunity to make sure that your loved ones can get to those is not sufficient going forward for how do you manage the entire detritus of digital stuff that makes up your lives from day to day.
Let's talk about another question I had in my mind is, what are the roles and responsibilities? So in other words, is it my responsibility to make sure that my digital estate is something that goes to the people that I want it to go to? Is that question making sense? So like you talked about the password file or the password manager. That's something I have to do. So is that kind of where the accountability lies, is like on the owner of that estate?
Only in part, I would say. And that gets to some of the things that we have as recommendations. I mean, you as the poor soul who's kicking the bucket, certainly has a role in making sure that this is accounted for, in the same way that you have a role that it is kind of up to you to get a will written out, to get a power of attorney sorted out, all those things, that is kind of on you. But it's not only on you, because there's so much that needs to change in laws around the world, in technology around the world, to enable the kind of choices that you might want to make, to enable those to actually be implementable.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I would say that if there, I got there first, Dean. Just kidding. If there's one thing that comes from the paper and the planning guide and the work of the community group, it's to shine a light that this is a thing. There are lots of people that are in this situation and they think that it'll all work out, or so and so is into technology, so no, everyone I've talked to just about is like, I need to go have that conversation. I need to lay out this plan for my loved ones. First and foremost, I need to just have the discussion in the first place about any and all of this. What's fascinating, there's a high level and a low level that happen both at the same time. The high level is, what does it mean for my identity and philosophically, and what's ethically and morally humane and right and all that kind of stuff. And then there's what about next Wednesday? And you can take action on both fronts at the same time. And there's a practical side and a deeper side to this thing.
Yeah, I think you've kind of nailed it there. And as far as responsibility goes, we can't give this responsibility to individuals if they don't know that they even have to think about it, right? And so in estate planning, it is not particularly common yet in estate planning, from at least the conversations I've had with estate planning lawyers and orgs that work in estate planning. It is not necessarily a common practice to manage the digital part of somebody's estate. Yes, we want to manage the house and the cars and the money and all of these things. But when it comes to your digital photos, your audio recordings, software licenses, all of this stuff is part of your digital estate. And there aren't necessarily consistent ways to manage this. If we look at, say, a tool like Facebook has a legacy contact that you can assign, and that legacy contact is able to do things like memorialize your account. But you have to take action to do that with Facebook. And the way that it works at Google is a little bit different. And the way that it works at Apple is a little bit different still. And then you get to some services want you to do things like have the executor of your estate, or whomever you're assigning these privileges to, log into your account, collect all the data, and then close down the account. And that's literally in their terms of service. Yet others in the terms of service don't want anyone else to log into your account, because that is effectively impersonation, and that has its own challenges and risks. So it winds up being a very complex topic that is really hard for individuals to unwind. It's hard for us as identity professionals to unwind the complexity of this right now. And so this really calls for a rethinking from identity professionals like ourselves, from large platforms, the Metas, the Googles, Apples, et cetera, of the world, LinkedIn, to enable mechanisms for individuals to proactively make decisions about what happens to those digital assets when they pass away. And we talk about it in terms of death quite often because it's kind of baked into the name. But this also applies to cases where you become incapacitated, and that incapacitation may be permanent. It may be temporal, and we have to be able to work through all of those different parts of how we deal with delegating authority to these digital assets when these state changes, for lack of a better term, occur.
Yeah, it seems that the digital asset is not just monetary assets, and not just private keys to your crypto account, right? It's it can be things like photos. You brought that up, which could become interesting, right? If the photos have monetary value or emotional value. Let's say that, like we talked about, you don't get to pick when you die. If you die and like you're in the middle of a divorce or things like that, you may not want the photos to go to certain people, or if you had an estranged relationship. So you can just imagine the scenario of like, it's almost got to be self-directed, right? You have to kind of set up the guidance or the advisement, I would think, so that people could take that and apply it to their situation, decide what they want to do. There's so many questions about this. One, I was wondering, is there a cultural aspect to this? I mean, are we kind of looking at this from the Western world perspective? I guess that's where a lot of the digital assets lie today. But is there a cultural aspect to it? Does that question apply?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right? How you view even the process or the concept of death and how your culture expresses that has massive implications as to what you think is justified or not. If you believe they continue to exist after that point in time, from our perspective, then what that means something different than some cultures who might want to, for various reasons, and some of these are in the paper, just kind of walk away from or distance yourself from that relationship or that existence, or commemorate that person, while they existed, doesn't anymore. So their LinkedIn profile or whatever else it is, they don't really want that to quote unquote live on in a digital form, right? And various cultures handle this differently. Some cultures, fascinatingly, guide people through various stages of old age and honor them and prepare them for what they see as just another transition. And so how we have these applications and these processes set up are going to look very different. And even in Australia versus the States versus Africa, levels of adoption of technology, and what those cultural beliefs are translate into how the culture thinks, how the culture expresses itself, and ultimately into the legal frameworks that drive what you can and can't do and what you need or don't need within that culture, because it reflects their values. And so that's really fascinating, right? Because it interacts with everything that's in a culture. This is what we value. So here's how we express that in light of this event for our people.
And I think what Mike says about culture is really important, because as we think about writing protocols, which we're not doing yet because we don't have the remit to do that, no pun intended with my new job. But as we think about writing protocols, we have to think about it from a way that is culturally neutral. Or maybe a better way to put it is not culturally neutral, but in a way that supports different cultures and their belief sets and the actions that they take upon somebody's death. So it is not up to those of us in the Death and Digital Light community group or those of us working on future protocols at some point to say, this is the one true way in which you must handle this. What we need to do is we need to enable structures or mechanisms that allow your digital estate to be managed within the context of the cultural framework that you live within, or the legal framework that you live within, because you live in a country or in a state and it has different laws. And so it's really important for us to all expose ourselves to as much of the world as possible. Travel is a great way to do that. But also through research, understanding, and talking to people and trying to understand how different parts of the world handle these events, so that we can eventually build the right tools that meet the need and meet people where they are, instead of enforcing a particular Western worldview.
So one of the things that back in the early days of my technical career, my job was to ask what could possibly go wrong. And as much as, Dean has pointed out that this is thinking about death in the digital estate, it requires that identity and access management practitioners really approach how they're thinking about digital identity differently. For that matter, it requires lawyers to approach it differently and regulators to approach it differently. Cultures are already approaching it differently, which is going to have implications. But it gets more complicated than that, because you also literally have to be thinking about, how can this be abused, right? What if someone is in, elder care abuse is a really big problem and a really big deal. And that could easily wrap into this as well, where someone is being pressured to give away their digital estate in the same ways that they might be pressured to give away their bank account information. Or partner and domestic abuse is another situation where if they don't actually have control, how can they reasonably protect their assets when they no longer have the capability to do so. So that's actually in the paper as well. Areas that we can't just, in a way, as much as it's an odd thing to say, we can't just think about the happy path of people having control, standard writers knowing what to do, regulators, lawyers following the rules. There is still even more to think about to protect people when this stuff is used incorrectly.
So, Heather, you mentioned that white paper you guys recently released, and it's a planning guide for public review, I believe. So the name of it was The Unfinished Digital Estate: Culture, Law, and Technology After Death, and Digital Estate Planning Guide. Hopefully I got that right. Please correct me if I got it wrong. Dean, with everything that we've been talking about, what's in that white paper? I mean, how are you communicating? Is this kind of like the go-to now, or is it just where things are at currently? First off, I guess, give us an overview of the paper and then tell
Sure.
us like how to interpret it.
I think the way to think of the paper is we came at this from the perspective of change needs to happen, but unless people understand the scope of the problem, the scale of the problem, the technical, legal, cultural problems, then we can't make change happen. And so when we started talking about this back in the wintertime with Gail at OpenID Foundation, and then started writing a proposal to write this paper, what we wanted to do is we wanted to write a paper that would influence the large platforms, influence politicians, influence lawyers and other, like the Bar Association or other groups that would have an impact in how we eventually transform digital estate planning and management to enable the technical components that are necessary in order to be able to successfully manage your digital estate. Because again, right now it's still kind of the wild, wild west, and we don't know exactly what it's going to take. It depends on every individual set of terms of service. So broadly, this was written to explore the space and influence others. That is the white paper. The planning guide is something separate. So the planning guide is about, as a human, as an individual, what do I have to think about when planning my digital estate? What are the things that I should consider? What are the things I need to include? What kinds of best practices are there for documenting, what services I use, where the credentials live, where other documents or data live that might need to be collected? Because you might have photos, say, on hard drives at your house. Maybe they're encrypted. There's an encryption key for it. Where does that encryption key live? How do I unlock this drive to unlock all of that data? And so, while the planning guide is for individuals, the white paper again is more targeted at industry and influence. But I think to the audience of this podcast, at least, both are probably quite interesting. And I'm sure Mike and Heather have things to add about the paper and the different portions that we all wrote.
I'll just add this, Dean. Like, I started reading the guide, and to your earlier point, I felt uncomfortable. I started like reading it, and I'm like, oh, like, yeah, I don't want to think about that. I'll think about that later. And it's one of those things, like writing your will. You've got to do something. You ought to there ought to be like a $99 death and digital estate will. That's kind of the way I felt about it. Just a very simple question. Where should people be putting their digital will?
We are not
That's
lawyers.
a good question.
This is not legal advice.
That is the best answer I've heard all day.
Yeah, but I think you're hitting it on the head, right, Jim? Like it's the forcing function of let's think about what happens if the worst happens, like Heather said, right? Or something bad happens, right? And I think I love the planning guide, and I love that certain people have volunteered to try it out. If they want to talk about that, they can. But that it forces that question. And it's only going to get more complicated. It's easier to do that now than it will be in a year or two. Because the way technology is advancing, it's not just going to be your accounts and stuff, the flotsam and jetsam you've left online, but it's going to be your minions, your digital minions that are out there doing things for you. What about, that's a whole another ball of wax. So yeah,
that's going to be the next release, right? Is like, how do you deal with your AI agents and all the data that they have about you?
It all feels intertwined, right? It's really fascinating that there's so many moving parts within the identity industry that are coming at a similar problem from a different direction. And that's, I think, in the paper as well, in part, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mike, you talked about actually trying this out. So in a couple of weeks at Authenticate, and I'm not sure when this is going to air, before or after Authenticate, but at Authenticate, I'm actually presenting a talk called Breaking Glass, restoring my digital life. And it was kind of inspired by this work that I'd been doing around death and digital estate, but also by, the flooding in Spain last year, the horrible fires in LA earlier this year. And thinking about, there are lots of ways in which people lose access to all of their digital stuff, and how do you get it back? So for years, I have maintained my 1Password emergency kit. I have a copy of it sitting in my safe deposit box with all of the data that you need to be able to get into 1Password, get all of the credentials out of 1Password, and help discover the scope of what my digital estate is. And so it works in both in case of death and in case of, I live in Seattle. We have volcanoes and tsunamis and all sorts of fun kinds of phenomena that happen here that could potentially cause me to lose access to everything. And so I went through the process of recovery. And I'm not going to give you the punchline here, but we'll talk about it after Authenticate. But it's actually more difficult than you think. And I learned some good lessons out of doing the recovery and what worked well and what didn't work well. And I'll share more about that on stage in a couple of weeks.
I think you're breaking ground with some of the stuff, Dean. And I wanted to ask, like, who this was being written for, because I started to think about some of the topics that we've talked about so far. And the one that keeps playing in my head over and over is this idea of, like, okay, the person passes away. I don't even want to say, like, I passed away, right? But, say I passed away. And
I noticed Jeff isn't on the call.
Oh, Heather.
Heather.
Wow.
Heather. Okay.
Dark. I went dark.
Jeff is fine. I texted with him earlier today. Folks, don't panic. Jeff will be back for the next episode. No, in all seriousness. So talking about keeping someone's Facebook page alive, or I don't know, maybe creating one for them. Like, do I want somebody to keep my LinkedIn profile alive? How do you even deal with that, right? Because, like, how many LinkedIn profiles exist today? Most people aren't going to have a digital will. Do spouses have the right to keep those alive, or other next of kin?
And other questions, right? Like, which family do I want to have my digital life? The one in Arizona, the one in Texas? No, just kidding. I only have one family. But yeah, and not only that, but also how technologically savvy are my survivors, are the people I'm passing this to? That's a huge thing, right? There's not going to be do A, B, C, D, E, and F, and you're done, and this is the right option for everybody. Because it's not going to be, right? I have, from the time I take over one of my family's laptops or phones, I have about 17 seconds to have everything installed and up and running and working before they take it back from me. It's a very narrow window for me to get things done, like password, any of that stuff. And so I think it's going to be tiering of who the recipient is, who you are, what they can handle, what they can't handle. It's like, yeah, I think you're right to call that out for sure.
There's also the question of, do you have like a technical advisor in your family that you can go to who can help unwind all this? So even if I am giving access to my digital estate to somebody in my family, say my wife, do I actually leverage my daughter as the more technical advisor to help her do all the things? And so this is something we all have to kind of consider, because not everybody is comfortable with the tools that we all use. I use GitHub a lot. And I know for a fact that I have no pathway to hand over access to my GitHub repos to my wife because she doesn't have a GitHub account. So I have to think carefully about who I want that to go to and how I want them to manage it, and then make sure I've written down that instruction or I've documented that instruction in some manner.
So you brought up a couple interesting topics as we kind of wind down this conversation. One was, this is not legal advice. So if it's not legal advice, then what do people do with it? What should I as an individual, this is making it very actionable for the listeners, what should I as an individual do from here?
I think from here, you read the planning guide, you do the things that you can do on your own. You're a smart guy. I am quite sure you are using some kind of a password manager or credential manager. If you're not, Jim, then we're going to have an intervention at Authenticate in a couple of weeks. But get everything put into your credential manager. Understand how you can gain access to that in an emergency and how others gain access to it in an emergency. Get a top secret password binder like Heather is showing off here, because that's maybe an appropriate technical solution for some people. Doesn't work very well with passkeys, but it does work well with passwords. And start the process of the documentation, the data collection, etc. But it is up to each and every one of us to figure out within the laws of our country, our state, etc., what it is that we need to do. And that means finding an appropriate lawyer who can help you with that legal advice. And there are some services out there that can help you that are often targeted at lawyers. Full disclosure, I was an advisor prior to taking this job. I was an advisor for a company called Eternal Me, which provides a platform for estate planning for lawyers that handles digital assets. There are other lawyers out there that are really focused on this, and there's a podcast by Jennifer Zagel about digital estate management. So some people are thinking about this, but you got to find an estate planning lawyer who can help you and actually understands this space and can work with you in this space.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I'm going to throw my thoughts out there, and you guys tell me if I'm way off. But we started the conversation around what is the scope, or what is a digital asset, and it's like it could be a lot of different things. I think people have to kind of figure out what it is for them. Like, what is it that like, do I care about like you have access to my cookies and stuff like that, or do I just want you to have family photos and access to my Gmail and X, Y, and Z, be able to get into the Bank of America account, whatever topics are important to you. And then I think there's like the idea of a will and there's the idea of a living will, right? The living will is you're incapacitated, but I think the kind of the same idea here would be that you, from a living will perspective, it's again trying to tell people what you want to happen in this event. It's not necessarily passwords or how to get the pictures. It's, if I die, I don't want my Facebook page to go on forever. Or if you want to keep it up for 3 months, I don't want to have, a GoFundMe page or whatever, to kind of start thinking about like, how do you want the world to treat your like memory or your LinkedIn page or things like that. Maybe you do want those things. Maybe you do want your LinkedIn page to stay up for a few years, just so people can go and like remember you. But I think those are personal decisions that you should communicate to your loved ones so they know how to treat you in those situations. What do you think?
Absolutely. And if you ask me, have I done that? The answer, honestly, is no, I haven't, because it's still fundamentally difficult to think about my own death. And so, while I sit here and can talk about this and can talk about it in abstract terms and all the things that we as humans should do, I haven't updated my will in 5 or 6 years. I certainly haven't updated to include my digital assets. So probably need to add that to my to-do list. And if I'm like most humans, it'll probably fall to the bottom of that to-do list because it's a really, really difficult thing to think about. But it is also important because uh, my family came together in a time, I got married in a time when digital photography was just taking off, had my kids at a time when digital photography was really readily available. And it means that I have a huge archive of digital memories that I want to make sure persist beyond me and are available to my family when I die.
I think
So I
that's
got to think
probably
about
the
it.
one that's probably the one that applies to the most of us because I don't know if you remember, but our parents had these things called photo books or photo albums. I'm sorry, photo albums, and you could
For the
flip through and
box
look at
under
all
the
the
bed,
pictures.
right?
Yeah, and who has a photo album anymore? It's like, if you get those made, it's kind of a special thing, but you don't have like 800 photo albums that generations can look back. Oh, that's what your great grandmother looked like. Like we have a potential to lose the photos for decades for people
Yeah.
if this doesn't get taken on. It's important. Um, I'm just kind of wondering, and this is kind of like tails on to what I was asking you. I think the space is evolving. What does this look like in 10 years? What does it look like when, we get to that AI world and, people are starting to have the ability to create like posthumous, like, hey, I'm so sad that Jim died. I'm going to create a Jim bot. And that way I can just talk to him every day. You know, that was just one thought that I had, but Mike, what kind of thoughts have you had in
Yeah, I
terms of
mean,
where this is going to be?
people are already doing that today. I told a story last Authenticate about a young man who lost what he considered his fiance, and he wasn't ready for her to go, and so he created early days of ChatGPT, created a chat bot with her emails and tweets and all that, and talked to her about her own death. And so people are doing that already. People are setting up bots for their family to talk to them after they're gone as an option. People are setting up bots for companionship. Really, all this gets back to the kind of the core of humanity, right? I think we're going to rush in and do things and then contemplate the consequences afterwards if the past is much of an indication. If digital life, here's an interesting thought that I literally just occurred to me about 10 minutes ago as we were all talking, because this is how this community group works. If we're talking about digital life and digital estates, do memorial places of remembrance, cemeteries, memorial parks, whatever else, does that shift into a digital format because people may be distributed or maybe dislocated or displaced? And now this is the website you go to remember Mike or whatever else. Feel free to register a public domain on my behalf and keep it up forever if you with a hat or something. I'm just joking, but that's also an interesting question. Heather?
So this, we're talking about this now as an urgent problem, which it is, but it's not a new problem. And for all of you science fiction readers out there, Anne McCaffrey has had a book of short stories. It might be about 50 years old at this point, called Get Off the Unicorn. And one of those short stories features a young woman who part of her job as her essentially graduate studies is to clear out old records from their version of the internet. And it was fascinating because she didn't approach it as a technical problem. She approached it as a sociological problem, looking at how people's engagement with technology changed over the centuries. I would really recommend people read that book just as another way to look at, well, what's our future going to look like? Because we're kind of living the creation of that material right now. And so if you want to know what's going to happen in the future, this is one path that it might very well go down.
This has been such a cool conversation. I told you guys when we hit record, right, we're going to go for about 45 minutes. I didn't check the time until about 5 minutes ago. We've been going over 50 minutes already. So what I wanted to do is kind of get final thoughts. I'm going to start with Dean, then go to Mike, then Heather, and then we'll do our lighter note at the end.
All right. Thanks, Jim. So final thoughts, the white paper and the planning guide are out there in public preview, openid.net. If you, I believe right now as I'm talking, it's on the homepage of openid.net, but there is a link and hopefully you can include that in the show notes, Jim, to download both documents. Please read them. Please provide us feedback. This was a labor of love for the three of us, and a lot of work went into this by the three of us on the white paper. The planning guide was written collectively by the Death and Digital State Community Group. There were lots and lots of people who committed time and energy to getting that put together. And we want to hear your feedback so that we can take that, make some final edits, and then publish these final documents. End of this year, early next year, we'll see kind of based on how much feedback we get, how long that process takes. And if you're interested in this as a topic overall, find me at the next conference. I'll be at Authenticate, like I said. I'm always at Identiverse and usually at IAW and other places. Find me. Let's talk. Look me up on ID Pro Slack. You can talk there. Or come and join us at the Death and Digital State Community Group. We alternate meetings between Wednesday afternoon Pacific time and Friday morning Pacific time so that we can try and capture both people in the APAC region as well as EMEA, in addition to North America. And we'd love to have your participation.
Yeah, and as we noted at the beginning, right? This is one of those things that's not unusual, not unique to a few of us. Death is not an edge case for any of us, right? Which means two things. One, the more people we have contributing to the community group and whatever results afterwards is super helpful. I think the whole group are concerned about missing viewpoints or missing cultural lenses or missing how we can get all the voices we can possibly do, input it into the content and input it into the community group and the working group so that no one gets left out of the discussion. It's really easy for us to be Western states centric with this kind of stuff. And then secondly, because it's not an edge case, if you take one thing away, start having conversations with your people you care about, older, younger, in between. I'm not saying you need to talk about death all day. I just mean maybe it's time to sit down and just start into those conversations, because as uncomfortable as they may be, those are the pathways into setting things up that will work in case things happen. So,
and I think my wrap up would be if and when you do read it, even if you don't have anything that you want changed about it, a little note saying, hey, I read it, it was good, or hey, I read it, just didn't work for me, but thanks for trying. Any kind of feedback is actually really helpful. Knowing that people are looking at it helps us a lot to feel like, we did a good thing.
Thank you, guys. We spent an hour talking about death. As you know, with our podcast, we like to end on a lighter note. So no better lighter note, I think. I just came back from New York, and I think here's another third rail statement from Jim. As we can all agree, New York pizza is the best, right? Right?
Wait, was that even a question? I mean, I can't eat pizza anymore, but I'm from Queens, and I'm just going to go right out there and say, well, duh.
I agree, but there is Chicago, there is California pizza. I don't know. For me, it's New York pizza. But here's the question for each person. We'll start with Dean, Mike, Heather. I actually ordered plain slices of pizza, and everybody got on my case. Like, who gets plain cheese pizza? I was like, that's what I was in the mood for. I change it up sometimes, but what is your go-to topping for pizza? Start with Dean.
Ooh, go-to toppings usually pepperoni or some kind of sausage. And I do like my pizza spicy, so if I can put some jalapenos on there, great. Otherwise, some kind of Calabrian chili or something.
Heartburn special, baby.
Yep, 100%.
I'm going to disagree with you on the New York thing. First off, that's just fundamental to what I would want. I want like a Neapolitan kind of, I don't know what you call it, but like, the little Italian high heat. Topping wise, it's going to be this one place in Fort Worth, of all places, called San Daniele. It's going to be prosciutto and it's going to be arugula on top of just cheese and fresh tomatoes. And the arugula goes on afterwards, right? Don't put that mess in the oven. That's just nasty. All right.
Nobody wants hot lettuce. Come on.
Sure. I'm sure someone does. I don't want to yuck anybody's yuck anyone's yum that's on the podcast. You can hate the Yankees, but yeah, hot salad is not great.
Okay.
Heather.
So Mike, I'm afraid we can't be friends anymore, but it was really nice while it lasted. Back when I could still have a proper New York style pizza, I see nothing wrong with cheese pizza because that was great, except it would have to be cheesy enough that you had to fold it in half and then the end would still like bend down a little bit and the oil would drip from it. Those were the best pizzas ever. I craved those for years after I couldn't have them anymore. So I support your cheese
that
pizza
sounds
life
like
choices.
exactly the pizza I had, and it was wonderful. It was probably just as good as the last time you had it. Hey, lighter note, of course, it ends friendships. It's kind of like the Yankees and Red Sox. Go Yankees. I'll say it again. Don't hit the unsubscribe button. In fact, if you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the podcast. Tell a friend, get them to subscribe. We are also on YouTube at idacpodcast.tv. Our website is idacpodcast.com. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Heather. And we'll be looking forward to an update in probably another year. What do you say?
Sounds
Sounds
great.
like a
Looking
plan.
forward to it, Jim. Thanks for your
All
time
right.
today.
Thank you all.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.